Hello and welcome to Macros with Maithili, where we take a hard look at all the major macroeconomic issues that are presently center stage. Well, it's the start of a year when, according to most seasoned observers, geopolitics is going to dominate as never before. In an interconnected world that is perhaps inevitable, when globalization coexists with nation states, geopolitical tensions and conflicts are almost a given. How will these tensions and conflicts affect us in India and the global economy? Can we contain the economic fallout of these conflicts? Which are the potential hotspots to watch out for in 2015? We're going to try and throw light on some of these issues with a panel of experts. Sanjay Baru, Director for Geoeconomics and Strategy at the London headquartered International Institute of Strategic Studies, Rajiv Kumar, Senior Fellow, Centre for Policy Research, New Delhi, and Nagesh Kumar, former Director General, RIS, and presently Head of the UN's Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, South and Southwest Asia Office, New Delhi. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Sanjay, if I might start with you, are geopolitical tensions rising the world? In fact, if I can quote from a recent article by Thomas Friedman, he says, there are strong indications that our vacation from geopolitical stability is over. So does it mean hard times ahead?
No, I don't agree with that view at all. I think the only part of the world where we have serious geopolitical problems remains the Middle East. And the Middle East has been the center of geopolitical conflict for a long time. I think Europe has been particularly exercised about what happened in Ukraine with the Russian annexation of Ukraine. But I think it's a manageable crisis. It's the West that has unnecessarily increased the tension there with its sanctions. There will be tensions between Europe and Russia for some time to come, just as there will be tensions between China and Japan, or for that matter China and India. I think geopolitical tensions have been there for a long time. They will continue for a long time. In some places a little more severe. But I do not see geopolitical tensions actually becoming a major source of concern anywhere else in the world apart from the Middle East. The Middle East remains the only real hotspot, and I cannot see that changing in the near future. I think what we are going to see is really increased what I call geo-economic competition. For example, the competition between the United States and China for markets, for the problem that Europe is facing in dealing with the pressure from Russia on the energy front, etc. So I see geo-economic issues coming to the fore rather than geopolitical issues.
Okay. Rajiv, Sanjay has given a very different angle to it. He says it's not so much geopolitical tensions and conflicts, but geo-economic issues that are going to come to the forefront in 2015. Would you agree with him?
Broadly agree with Sanjay, Maithili, but except that I think the issue about with all the the Muslim fundamentalism, which is the IS in Syria, in Iraq, and in Afghanistan, etc., could actually come to a boil, and we don't know the ramifications for it. Whether how it will affect Turkey, how it might even affect the oil supplies, etc. So that is one part of it. The other thing is that this year we'll see the complete withdrawal of the NATO forces from Afghanistan, and we don't know how that will play itself out, and that's in our neighborhood. So that could well mean more sort of geopolitical tensions in our region. And finally, I think we may not have seen the end of what might be happening in Southeast Asia between China, the ASEAN countries, and Japan and Philippines, etc. So I think while it may not escalate or aggravate far too much, but there could be a situation that we will have to learn to live with some geopolitical tensions even in 2015. Just a final word, which is that Russia is going to suffer quite badly with this falling oil prices. And we do not know their reaction to this and what might happen in Russia as the people start suffering a loss of living standard as a result of these oil price decline. So in all, I think 2015 could be a little more problematic than 2014 as far as geopolitical tensions are concerned.
Nagesh, Sanjay was quite reassuring, Rajiv a little less so. Where do you stand? Do you think we're getting unduly alarmist? Or there's no real reason to worry? Things are much the same, both in 2015 as well as 14. Nothing much is going to change.
I think I agree with both the assessments of Sanjay and Rajiv. and there will be instabilities and tensions. We do not know as yet how they will play out, but certainly also economic issues, for instance, Fed, now that US economy is turning around very well, the pressure on Fed to withdraw the monetary policy softening and to go back to the normal kind of monetary policy might also be taking shape, and that would also create some kind of ripples across the world in terms of capital markets and exchange rate markets. And of course, India, is managing very well these two realms of policy, but one could expect some turbulence, some stability over there as well. And oil prices, of course, as Rajiv has said, I mean, there are many issues which can destabilize oil markets. Right now, of course, softening of oil prices has been a good thing, but how long it would stay like that, this is something to be seen.
Sanjay, you were very reassuring as far as the number of conflicts and intensity is concerned. But even so, assuming that there will be conflicts, which are the channels through which the economic fallout will play out? Commodity, oil prices, currency markets, which are the channels through which this impact will be felt?
Well, there again, I think I would rather be reassuring than too worried. I think we have seen through the last couple of decades that tensions in the Middle East do not really have a direct impact on oil prices. You can have short-term fluctuations above and below a trend, but I think one of the things that we have learned from dealing with the Middle East crisis is that unless there is actually a major conflict, for example, if let's say Israel bombs Iran, or if there's a direct conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran, in other words, if there is conflict within the Persian Gulf itself, which we have not seen for some time now, ever since the end of the Iraq war, I do not see any major impact on the movement of oil. I think we will see some recovery in oil prices. The most forecasts suggest that oil prices would be somewhere in the neighborhoods of $70 to a barrel, or maybe a little more than that. But overall commodity prices have been going down, and that is being driven much more by the forces of supply and demand, the slowdown in the Chinese economy, the fact that Europe is not picking up. If United States continues to do well as it is now, in the last quarter it has done reasonably well, and if India picks up, there will be some increase in consumption of commodities by the US, by India, and maybe a couple of other major economies. But overall, we are looking at subdued market conditions, and therefore the current downturn in commodity prices, I don't see being reversed by any geopolitical event. I mean, we can have conflict, as I keep saying, Middle East will be an area of conflict, but those conflicts haven't had any dramatic impact on oil prices in a long time.
Thank you, Sanjay, for that very reassuring message. But I'm afraid on this note, we have to slip into a very short break. But please do stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Maithili, and we're discussing the possibility of increased geopolitical tension in 2015 and the possible economic fallout of that. Rajiv, before the break, Sanjay was very reassuring once again when he spoke about oil prices, the fall not being driven by geopolitical reasons. But in the same article of Thomas Friedman that I was quoting earlier, he says the last time when oil prices fell so dramatically, it had dramatic impact. In fact, he even links it to the fall of the Berlin Wall. So will we have that kind of impact this time also?
Well, I don't think so. Because the oil prices, as Sanjay said, are a result of the supply and demand, and sooner rather than later OPEC would act to control supply, because it is going to hurt some of the OPEC members also quite soon. But the one thing that I want to introduce in this discussion is the possibility of what we futurologists often call wild cards. And there are some wild cards in the offing that one could take care of, that one could sort of take cognizance of. For example, we don't yet know what North Korea might do and how it could play itself out. We don't know how could the Chinese reforms that are continuing the anti-corruption drive, the fact that they've actually they've got to change direction of their economic demand from an external demand to a domestic demand situation, and the ongoing changes in the PLA, and possibly some struggle for leadership there as to how that plays out and how fast or how much the Chinese economy slows down. The second wild card. The third wild card, as I had hinted earlier, would be Afghanistan, as to what happens to who takes power, who takes control there after the NATO troops have moved out. And finally, in our own very neighborhood, I don't know whether Pakistan, how does it go? How is that going to play out? And the last wild card that I would want to present to you is what in the Middle East, with what is happening with the IS and its impact on Saudi Arabia, Iran, Syria, Turkey confrontation. So these wild cards to me point towards I think a continued volatility in commodity prices, and that is what we should have to learn with as we go forward. The fact that I don't think it will be useful for us to either anticipate a continuing sort of secular decline or a recovery very soon. We need to learn to live with volatility in commodity prices across the board, and to that extent we need to safeguard our own private sector from the adverse impact of that through clever economic policy making. What could this be? What could these be? Something that we could discuss later on.
Nagesh, both Rajiv as well as Sanjay spoke about commodity prices and falling oil prices. But what about trade flows? Are geopolitical tensions really leading to the US going in increasingly for things like, Trans-Pacific, TPP and TPIP, not going the, multilateral route like WTO? Is this a consequence of geopolitical tensions?
Yeah, well, I think on the trade side, one thing we have to learn to live with is that the kind of trade growth, world trade growth, that we had before the onset of the global financial crisis, that era of 10% plus kind of growth of world trade is over, and one has to be content with 2%, 3% kind of growth, especially because of the fact that the developed economies, the advanced economies, are in for a longer haul of uncertain and subdued growth. And the other thing is that they are focusing on unwinding the global imbalances or their accumulated debt and trying to save more and produce more and rely on domestic production more and importing less. And the other factor is what you hinted at is this new trade agreements, the transatlantic and trans-Pacific, the TPP and TTIP, which would mean that a lot of trade between the advanced economies will take place on a preferential basis, and that means less of opportunities for rest of the world to export to the advanced economies. So I think that way there will be a lot of change coming through. I mean, TPP, for instance, was to be concluded by the end of this year, which doesn't seem to be happening, but it might happen in the coming year, and similarly for TTIP, and these agreements would mean lesser space for developing countries, and then they also need to look at the options available for them. So these are other possibilities, but on oil prices, I think I tend to agree with Sanjay that it would be around $70 a barrel. The era of very high oil prices of $140 to a barrel might be not seen in near future for the simple reason that the shale revolution, and increasing resort to the renewables, the high emphasis being put on solar and wind in different countries, would keep the demand rather subdued, besides the fact that the advanced economies are in a long haul of subdued outlook.
Sanjay, we spoke about the commodity channel, we spoke about the trade channel, but what about the capital flows? Because recently when the US was putting the pressure on Russia, in fact, China agreed to get into a swap arrangement. In fact, William Pesek, in an article in Bloomberg, says that soon Christine Lagarde, IMF, etc. will not have any work because China will become the lender of last resort. That brings us also to the rise of China. How do you see China, in fact, tying in with capital flows, slowly kind of usurping the place of the IMF and maybe even the US?
Well, I think that is really the issue. I mean, I said at the very beginning that what I see going ahead into the next year is increased what I call geo-economic competition rather than geopolitical conflict. I think we are firmly in the era of geo-economic competition. The TPP, that is a Trans-Pacific Partnership which the United States has sponsored, bringing in many of its allies and friends in Asia into a common market. The TTIP, which is the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, along with European Union and the US. These are all geo-economic initiatives aimed at really marginalizing China or putting pressure on China to open up much more to the world economy. And I think that is what is going to happen. And the Chinese are asserting their economic might. They have become a powerful economy. They are using their $4 trillion of reserves. They are using this money in order to create institutions through which they will lend. I think that the fact that Europe and the US have been unwilling to reform the IMF has become counterproductive. You know, I wish these countries had seen the light of the day and accepted a change in their shareholding, allowed India and other emerging economies a higher share. But the fact that the West is resisting this geo-economic change and in fact is trying geo-economic containment of China through these trade agreements is also putting pressure on China to in fact accelerate its own economic initiatives internationally. Having said that, let me just add one more word on what Rajiv has talked about wildcards. I really do not see the US completely withdrawing from Afghanistan. I think the Afghan situation can be managed, except again in Afghanistan, China will play a more high-profile role. I think China is becoming a factor in South Asia, which for India is really a geo-economic competition. It's China's economic might that is allowing it to play this role, not just its military might. As far as Asia is concerned, I do think China and Japan will manage their relations in a way that doesn't destabilize Asian growth process. I think there's a lot of moral pressure in Asia for stabilizing their geopolitical environment so that Asia can sustain its economic momentum. The problem really is in the Middle East, as I've said at the very beginning. That is where wildcards are genuinely possible. And I think that is where Rajiv is right, that Middle East is something we should all be worried about.
Absolutely. But I'm afraid on that note, we have to slip into another short break. But please do stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Maithili, and we're discussing the consequences of increasing geopolitical tensions in the world in 2015. Rajiv, before the break, Sanjay again brought the point of geo-economic tensions and the rise of China. What does the rise of China really mean as far as, multilateral arrangements are concerned, World Bank, IMF? Will these institutions become less important? Will China become the new lender of last resort?
Maithili, before I come to China, let me sort of do the usual economist bit, which is to disagree when the others are saying something, and which is that I don't think that the TTP and the TTIP is going to be signed anytime soon. This is a lame duck US presidency. It doesn't have fast track authority. It does not know yet how to deal with China on the one hand, and Europe is not going through its one of the most wonderful periods for it to be able to sign anything. So I don't think 2015 will have anything, any likelihood of any of these two big, the mega regional trade pacts being signed. If they could be, they will be after the next US president comes into office, which is November 2016 and beyond. So I think that's not going to happen. But at the same time, India must at this time completely discard all her export pessimism, to which I am afraid even our governor RBI has added his own bit to get that pessimism going, and create an environment in which it can have much bigger market share than its meager 2% or less in the global trade that it has today. And in that sense, it will face China quite head on when it tries to expand its market share, especially in manufactured products. Now, China being the lender of last resort, I think is quite a way off, because at the moment still China has got about 7% of the world economy, but it is far less than what you have the US. And if you take US, Japan, and Europe together, I think they far outweigh the Chinese economic clout or its share or its say in any of the multilateral fora. So I don't think China is going to emerge as the lender of last resort. What China will do is to use its very deep pockets to buy influence in Southeast Asia, in South Asia, in Africa it is already is doing, and perhaps also in East Europe. So what India needs to watch out for is the Chinese declared, is against the Chinese declared intention of bringing South Asia into the Chinese, into the Chinese sphere. And that is where I think India needs to focus laser-like on improving its investment and economic conditions within India, so that the Indian private sector investment can become, can be reignited, and it can offer, it can offer real competition to China both within South Asia and take, as it were, the economic competition to it in Southeast Asia. So I don't see China emerging as the lender of last resort for a good long time yet, because I think the established advanced economies have far more economic weight at this point of time than China can manage.
Nagesh, along with the rise of what Sanjay called geo-economic tensions, is what we are seeing is the use of economic weapons. Like we've seen the US, impose trade sanctions. We've also seen it impose fines on banks which dealt with what they called, countries like Iran. We've also seen the use of SWIFT, that is a worldwide mechanism for transfer. The US has been and the West has increasingly been using economic weapons to deal with these tensions. Is there anything we can do about it, or is that the order of the day?
Well, I think the underlying impression one has is that the sanctions do not work very well, and recently US has withdrawn sanctions from Cuba. This is one indication that I think they have recognized that they do not really work, and countries find ways around these sanctions. And hopefully the sanctions imposed on Iran would also be phased out very soon, so that it would be open for business for countries like India, and the problems that one is facing, the businessmen are facing in dealing with countries like Iran would be over. I don't think sanctions really work very well, and they are very effective. What is very important for countries like India is to, of course, as Rajiv said, that push into the export markets, and for that you need a very strong campaign for domestic production. And there is a lot of space that has been given away over time economically to the producers from other countries, which is not a bad thing, but at the same time the disincentives that were created for local production, they need to be neutralized, so that local manufacturing can take off in a real sense, and they can not only use the local market for expanding, but use that large domestic market that they have and leverage that to export at the margins. And this is how East Asia grew actually and became a manufacturing hub of the world. And this is how I think it is India's turn now to become the next manufacturing hub. And that would give a lot of strength in terms of country meeting the challenge of these instabilities in the global market, and also emerge as a very stable and major engine of growth of the world economy.
Well, we're almost running out of time, but Sanjay, I could very quickly ask, in fact, each of you, what can a country like India do in the face of such rising geo-economic tensions? Sanjay?
Well, I think frankly, India's job is at home. We need to get our investment rates rising. We need to increase manufacturing activity, provide employment for our people at home. I think India's work is essentially at home in the near term. It's only when the economy becomes stronger and more energetic, returning to a growth rates of 6% and above, probably 7%, that we can once again re-engage the rest of the world. In the medium term, we have to come to terms with China's geo-economic power. It is a rising power. I think, it's not so much its weight in the global income, which is as significant as is $4 trillion of reserves. It's cash in hand that China has. We don't have that kind of cash in hand. We need to therefore build bridges with countries that are willing to invest in India, like Japan, like the United States, like countries which would like to see India becomes a stronger economy. I would imagine that's our job at home.
Rajiv, would you agree that most of our job is at home?
Absolutely. We have to get our domestic act together. And in fact, may I add that it is at this point quite important for India to give up the talk of joining the Security Council, or getting a table at the getting a place at the high table of global governance, etc. Because in the real world, given the realpolitik, it is far more important to get your economic weight behind you before you start making global claims or claims to global governance. And I dare say, if we don't do that, we might well be in a real problem, because China is doing it, and we might well find that our domestic market for manufacturers is overtaken by Chinese sooner than later. So absolutely, as I use the word, we have to focus like a laser on getting the domestic investment and business environment better, and improve and attract investors, both domestic and foreign, to India, and for manufacturing here, and also for the services sector.
Nagesh, would you agree with that it's a case of physician heal thyself? We need to kind of get our own house in order first?
Absolutely. I think, as everyone has said, the more, stronger an economy that India is, others will take also the country with due respect, and the place on the high table will be, granted. So, in fact, the fact that India became an important economy in the dream run of the world economy of 2003 to 2007-8, that was the time, because India was growing at 9% plus kind of rates, that everybody started to take India seriously. And this is another, sort of time that we have to switch and gear up the growth rate, reach the rates that we had been growing at earlier, 8% plus kind of growth rates. And once we are there, everybody else will recognize India and India's potential. And I think the next 20 years, we can continue that kind of accelerated growth. All other things will, will be taken care of.
Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have in this edition of Macros with Maithili. The good news is that all our experts agree that despite rising geopolitical tensions, geoeconomic tensions, our work is largely at home. Thank you so much, Sanjay, Rajiv, as well as Nagesh, for sending out that very reassuring message. Thank you also for watching, but we'll be back next week with yet another edition of Macros with Maithili. Till then, it's thank you and goodbye from all of us at TT Now.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/etnow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at etnowlive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/etnow.